Um, I'm going to be interviewing my grandpa from my dad's side today. Where did our family come from and how do you know?
Um, they came from England, both of them. I know based on the fact they're first generation coming over, and my dad was 12 when he came back the second time in 1927, and my mother came over when she was 18 years old. She was born in 1913 and came over in 31. So they're the only ones I know for sure. Although, obviously, my grandfather on my dad's side came over. I don't know anything about my grandmother on my father's side. Um, my grandfather on my mother's side, he came over 16 years before he brought the family over. And I don't know anything about his wife or my grandmother because she died when I was teeny tiny. So they're all from England. And I went to England and went to the areas where my parents were born. I didn't find anything, but at least I got to see where they came from.
Do you remember where?
My mother came from Cornwall, and my father came from a little town just north of Plymouth, England.
How many generations can you trace back from your parents? Can you recall names, places of birth, or birthdays?
I can only go back. I can only tell you about my grandfathers on both sides because my dad's mother died giving birth to my dad's brother in 1927. And so obviously I didn't know her. And my mother's mother died when I was about 3 years old. I don't remember anything about them, and I'm not even sure I know their names.
Okay. Do we have any veterans in our family?
Well, it depends on what that means. I have a cousin that was in the Navy. Actually, he's a second cousin. And I have another second cousin who I believe was in the Air Force. But other than that, nobody immediate to me was in the Army or Navy or whatever.
Can you tell me any stories about our family?
Oh, can I tell you any stories? Yeah, but no, they were Depression people, and very skeptical, very cautious. I think they were still scared. You can imagine being 12 years old in England when your mother died and then coming to the United States, to a new country that was in a depression, how that would make you feel. And my mother was essentially fatherless she came here when she was 18 and her father was gone for 16 years, so she had no fatherly role model. And she was, what's the word? She was very dependent. She depended almost exclusively on my father doing the heady things. But other than that, my dad's brother didn't get along with his father, my grandfather, and ultimately my dad brought him into our house to keep him from getting injured. And so everybody thought that I was the middle child of three. My uncle was the oldest, me, and then I have a brother that's a year and a half younger than me. The only other interesting thing, probably because it was very deeply held when we were growing up, is that my brother is gay. And he didn't, what do they say, come out of the closet till probably 20, he was 20 years old. Even though those of us in the immediate family, well, I know my parents knew it, and I just suspected it, but didn't know for sure till he was a teenager. My grandfather on my father's side was a very hard worker. He died when he was 64 years old. My grandfather on my mother's side died when he was 88 years old. And so I'm hoping that longevity got passed along. I'd like to see Caroline get married.
Do we have any genealogical records, and if so, where are they?
Well, I don't know of any. In fact, to be perfectly honest with you, I know very little about my family. I have written, I started writing a letter to the family about the background, my background, the history. And at this point, I'm only up to 1936, when I was born. And if you read it, you'll see that I don't know my grandmother's names. There were aunt and uncles that I don't know. That I just don't know anything about them. They had children. Probably a very interesting story is that my parents got married on June the 1st, 1935. And my grandfather, my father's father, married my mother's sister on the same day and made the front page of the Detroit News. So my aunt became my grandmother.
On the same day?
They were married in a double wedding ceremony on the same day. The two sisters, my mother's oldest sister, May, and my mother got married to father and son.
Do you know why your parents came over?
Well, nobody's ever told me. I just have to believe that from the area of England that they came from, jobs were not very plentiful. And my dad's dad was a landscaper, he just decided that he was going to come over here. And I think the fact that his wife, my grandmother, died in childbirth, he wanted to get away from that whole scene. My other grandfather, my mother's father, I have to believe, because I don't know any better, that he came here because he needed a job. And then he was going to send for his family, but it took a long time. Other than that, I've never heard of an actual reason. I'm just guessing based on what little I know.
Is there any like culture that carried over, like foods that we eat?
Oh yeah, we have some traditions. My family, my mother and dad, and my brother and I were not very close. And we didn't have a lot of traditions. The things that I remember are that, well, English people are noted for the lack of cuisine, or at least tasty cuisine. My mother was no exception. On a scale of 1 to 10, her food probably came in about 2 or 3. But there was one thing that I enjoyed, and that was Cornish pasty, which is dough rolled out in a flat sheet, and potatoes and meat and rutabaga are put in the center. The dough is folded over the top of it, and they're put into the oven and cooked till they're done. Now, the tradition of this is that the coal miners in Western England, the wives would get up early in the morning and make pasties for their husbands and wrap them in paper. And they would take them to work, and they'd have a hot meal at lunchtime. And it just became a regular thing, a regular meal. I liked it. In my family, when I was growing up, we each got an individual one. And occasionally there would be a picnic, and they would make pasties, and we'd go on the picnic, and then sometime during the course of picnicking, we'd each get a pasty to walk around and eat, and it was good. That tradition was carried on into my family, and because we were so large, we didn't make individual pasties. We would have been there doing it for 2 or 3 days. So my wife made a sheet pasty, cookie sheet, and put pastry on the bottom and the potatoes and meat on top, and then another layer on top, and then we just cut them out like squares. Now that we've gone back down to a small family, 2 of us, we make it out of, we make one pasty, which is like the traditional pasty, and we eat that. In our family, you knew what day it was by what you were eating at dinner. So if you didn't remember what day it was, you waited till supper, and whatever you had to eat told you what day it was. So it was that routine. And I guess a good word would be mundane.